From Advance Your Wellbeing and Good morning, everybody. I'm Marie Jenkins from Advance Your Wellbeing, and welcome to our second season of The Secret Diary of Marie Jenkins 47 Plus. Now, today's a special Housing Week podcast because I've got two brand new, fresh guests to our podcast. So I'm super excited to hear about their expertise because they've both, between them, got years and years of experience, both from a CEO perspective and also in housing. So first of all, let me introduce you to Gerraint. He is the CEO of Platform Group.
I'm not.
And
Don't say that. Elizabeth will kill me. I'm the exec director of growth and development. But it's fine. She'll be fine.
And we've also got Katherine Stubbins, who has worked in housing policy for a number of years, although I think now you're in retirement. Is that right, Katherine?
I definitely am, yes. I closed the business in 2019. Hello.
But years and years of experience. So Katherine is a retired housing consultant in housing policy with a housing career spanning 40 years. My goodness. She is a board member at March's Community-Led Housing Network and Fownhope Community Land Trust, and is a Chartered Institute of Housing member champion. Her specialities are in issues relating to older people, rural housing, planning, health and social care, so massive broad spectrum there of areas of expertise. And she's passionate about using her knowledge and experience to support community-led housing initiatives. That is fascinating, Katherine, and hopefully we'll pick up on each of those elements as we launch into today's episode. So now on to Gerraint. So Gerraint has a passion for building affordable housing. He is the Executive Director, Growth and Development with Platform Housing Group, a business that currently delivers 1,600 affordable homes a year. That's a fantastic stretching target, so I think that's excellent. He's worked for a number of blue chip organisations in property development, and he spent 10 years with Vodafone as a global property strategy manager. He then moved to join Barratt Developments in 2008. And since then, he has held a number of executive and non-executive director roles for charities and housing associations. And he's at NED. What does NED stand for?
Non-exec director.
Oh, sorry, just to clarify. At Link Cymru Housing Association. Gerraint takes part in endurance cycle events, and I remember I've followed a number of his journeys, if you like, his cycling journeys on social media. And last year he circumvented Wales, raising funds for terminally ill children that fulfills their dreams and wishes. So that is lovely. So thank you both for joining me today. So let's launch into today's topics. So the first one I want to talk about is, how do you believe the housing sector can continue to innovate? Now, Katherine, with all your years' experience, can I come to you first?
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it could go in so many different directions. My career started as a housing trainee in London in 1970 something, when the financial situation around provision of affordable housing was completely different. And I guess the one thing that's consistent through all that time is that it's government policy that has driven what happens in social and affordable housing. 99 times out of 100, it's been about there being less funds from government forcing people to find other ways of approaching things. And once you've got that framework, then it's down to the individual organisations as to how they respond to that. You know, there'll be a few dinosaurs and ostriches will put their head in the sand. but the successful organisations, and I was interested to hear about Geraint talking not only about platform but about Link Cymru, because I've done some work with them in the past, and they seem to be very good at thinking things through and finding new directions. It's about what happens within the organisation, and that starts at the top. So board members as well as executive directors need to be open to change, open to new ideas, wherever those come from, and adopting the right sort of behaviours that will make sure they develop their people and make effective use of whatever funds they have. Shall I leave it there?
Well, it's really interesting what you said there, actually, Katherine, because it picks up on something that me and Geraint was talking about before we started recording, in terms of approaches housing associations are taking in terms of having sort of for different sort of offerings. Did you want to chip in there, Geraint?
Yeah, sure. I think it's interesting. Katherine mentioned about the pretty much hinting at the scarce resources and funding issues that all HAs are struggling with. And I think if you look at the environment we're operating in now, as you said, I joined Barratt in 2008, which was previously the unprecedented housing crisis. And now, without a doubt, we're in another unprecedented housing crisis. And that funding issue is massive, because not only we've got to deliver more homes, we've got to build more homes. We're massively behind the curve on the delivery of affordable housing, but we've also got to maintain our stock. As you say, we manage 47,000 homes, and we've got to raise the EPC levels on those. We've got to make the homes better for our customers. We've got to build very environmentally friendly housing going forward that is cheaper to live in. Massive pressure on our customers in fuel poverty. So it's about the innovation around that and looking at modern methods of construction, volumetric housing, reducing the carbon footprint for all our organisations. And I think the innovation comes from proper collaboration. Interestingly, we probably collaborate an awful lot more than other organisations out there building houses, trying to put that fairly nicely. However, I think there's a lot more collaboration that could take place. I think, a lot of the big developing HAs, if you amalgamated 5 or 6 of the big HAs in the Midlands, they'd be classed as volume house builders. So it's how you can leverage that capability and capacity to make a massive difference for, increasing the skills of our customers, as I said, into affordable, safe, warm homes. Absolutely critical. But I think that's the key: partnership, collaboration, and working together, and community-based. Not just HAs, but councils, community organisations, other charities. I think the opportunities are definitely out there.
Yeah. And to pick up on what Katherine was saying earlier as well about developing their staff and organisational culture, because ultimately, if we're looking at innovation now, that comes from either partnerships, like you've already said there, Geraint, but it also comes from your workforce. So I'm interested to learn what sort of mechanisms are in place at Platform in terms of that side of things.
Well, we've got a very strong apprenticeship part of the organisation that we see that as the future growth, building our future leaders, the future managers, future leadership profile for the organisation, that people join very young, you build their loyalty, they understand the organisation. And a lot of them, I think this is one of the interesting things about housing associations, is the breadth of roles there are in housing associations that are available to young people coming into the sector, and being ambassadorial about that, and making sure people, youngsters in school, people coming back into the workplace, there's plenty of opportunities in housing associations for that. So apprenticeships, looking at future graduate programs, helping our customers back into work, education and training, which, we work very hard at. We've got a lot of focus on how we can also upskill and provide training opportunities for our colleagues across the board. So I think there's no one angle to it. You've got to look at it on multiple levels. Yeah,
I agree. Katherine, can I come to you? Because we're talking about retaining staff and attracting best talent, because that's what we want to ultimately do in terms of the housing sector. So what's your views on that? How can the sector continue to sort of get that best talent that's out there?
I think Gerraint's made a very good point, and each organisation needs to kind of respond to its own local situation. I worked in Oxford for the City Council for a long time, which is obviously an urban area, but it's a very small urban area surrounded by other rural district councils. So there was no opportunity for any volume house building. There was no opportunity to expand onto green fields because it all belonged to somebody else. And that created a problem not only for developing housing, but also for attracting staff, because it's such an incredibly expensive place to live. So we had to grow our own. And it was a great experience seeing people who came in as a clerk or an admin person or a receptionist doing really, really well. As they kind of navigated and got support from like-minded staff through the organisation. I'm thrilled to know that one or two of the people who joined me at the beginnings of their careers are now directors and CEOs, and that's really, really fantastic. But they need that support along the way, and that sort of situation isn't right across the board. Growing your own staff is really important in terms of culture, and understanding how the organisation works and how you can influence it. But I think you also need. Sorry, that's Outlook making crazy noises. I think you also need fresh ideas coming in to give you a fresh perspective and to introduce different types of experience. From that point of view, I think programs where you can bring individuals together from different organisations in their kind of learning and development is really, really valuable. And I'm probably more on Marie Jenkins' territory here, I think. I'm in two minds about the value of kind of formal housing qualifications. I went through that route myself. It was very helpful to me. But probably the most useful thing was right at the beginning, that housing traineeship I mentioned, took me right across the housing and associated services in the London borough I was working in. And that knowledge of how environmental health works, what the planners do, what the carpenters do during the day, the whole thing was incredibly valuable, and I carried that with me all right through my career. I think I've got off topic a bit, but the one thing I did particularly want to mention was I've seen in the last few days an announcement that the government's going to do some sort of review into, I can't remember if it's called housing training or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And that strikes me as really valuable. Not only does it say, oh, maybe government has got it to some extent, so far as making some inroads into addressing the housing crisis, but also I think it's a really positive step in enabling professionals, associated people within the property industry, CIH, everybody to take a good look at what we're going to need for the next 2-3 decades.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting that when I worked in housing, I came into it without any prior knowledge, and it opens a whole world of opportunities in terms of the different sorts of roles that you can learn about and upskilling. So it's a fantastic sector that, can really help progress your career, whether that's moving up the ladder or learning other skills. So I'm a great advocate for the sector. But in terms of what you're doing there, Gerraint, young people, what do you do? Because I heard something about ambassador roles. What could you tell me a bit more about what that is?
Well, I'm an advocate for that. I think the Construction Industry Training Board used to have ambassadorial roles that go into schools and colleges, and I know that in different areas across our operating regions, there are opportunities to, as I say, go into schools, colleges, talk to people about the opportunities, as Katherine alluded to. The breadth of roles there are in housing associations is huge. And I've actually recruited a lot of people from the commercial sector into the new team that we've created in the house building functioning platform. And they are absolutely stunned at the scale, the breadth, the things we get involved with, from, you know, well-being funds to, you know, basically building houses, you know, care workers in the organization, you've got internal lawyers, you've got Salesforce, you've got and carpenters, multi-trade skills people. It's a huge opportunity. And I think the other point that Katherine raised was people can come in at one level or in one skill set and grow through a coaching culture, which the platform very much advocates, a collegiate approach where you learn off each other. And people, you know, quite often end up in development, and they might start in tenancy services, or they might do it the other way around, because the barriers are not as rigid as you might find in some very top-down approach organizations. I think, you know, it's a willingness for us to go out into the community and tell people about what we do. You know, as you said again, Marie, about social media, I think that plays a massive part. I think housing associations, when they get it right in social media world, promoting the great stuff they do, big advocates for change, big advocates for community growth, and you get it out there, and there's a lot of really great things going out there. If you start looking on social media for some of the stuff that organizations are doing, it's just so impressive. But it's getting that vibrancy and excitement about the opportunities. And I mentioned it to you before, making a big difference. So profit for purpose, all that sort of catchphrases that are out there. But it's a fact. We've got to be efficient. We've got to be effective. We've got to make the best of the money we have to make a better deal for our customers. And that is very exciting.
Yeah, totally. And ultimately, it may be a charity, but it's still a business. It's just that it's got that social conscious, if you like, and opportunity to do more sort of corporate social responsibility type of things. But yeah, I totally agree with you there. There's so many opportunities, and hopefully if anybody listens to this, they might be inspired to come and work in the sector. That's the hope. So moving on to our next topic, because we've moved forward about talking about talent there. So I want to ask you, in terms of communities and estates in the future, let's zoom forward to 2050. Will the communities and estates look the same? What's your views? Katherine, can I come to you?
You can. Marie, you gave us a little bit of advance warning about these questions, and looking back at what I said to you at the time, I realised it was all about estates and not about communities. I was commenting on, excuse me, on what I hoped would be the case, which would be, picking up on what Gerraint said earlier, better quality, more energy efficient, cheaper to build, cheaper to live in. I'm sure the household finances are going to play a big part over the next decade and beyond. I do worry about some of the eldest estates that are going to be over 100 years old by then. I think some of Peabody's 4-story blocks in London are already centenarians. Whether they are designed in a way that can be adapted for the even longer term, I'm really doubtful, and I worry that the regeneration programs or the design skills to deal with those just won't be available, and I think that creates all sorts of complications in terms of communities. I think communities are going to look very different as well, though. Thinking about my own kids who are kind of heading for 40-ish, there are so many more single people in that generation, and at heading for 70, they're still going to be working. So their lifestyle is going to be very, very different to what is the kind of received perception at the moment. All those single people are not necessarily antisocial or asocial is probably what the word I'm looking for. You know, they have friends, they have social relationships, they enjoy having a good time, and I'm sure they'll continue to do so, but they don't necessarily want to live with somebody else. So I wonder if there's scope for a completely different type of housing development, which might be efficient on land, you build individual apartments which give people their private space. You don't necessarily equip a full kitchen or anything like that. You move to more of a co-housing model where you've got communal space for cooking, washing, outside space. You might even have a cafe, a restaurant on the ground floor. It's beginning to sound like an extra care home, but that's not what I'm doing at all. But, you know, it's somewhere between that and the kind of loft living in central London where you have a gym downstairs. So some combination of those two concepts, maybe.
Yeah.
But I suspect that it's going to be organisations like housing associations and maybe one or two enlightened councils in urban areas that would trial that sort of thing, because Gerraint might agree with this on his Barratt experience. House builders generally are not prepared to take a risk on doing something new unless there's some sort of real incentive for them to do so.
That's interesting, because I can absolutely 100% see that sort of tenure, to be fair, Katherine. I mean, Grant, in terms of agile working, for example, people are moving towards agile working. Now, our tenants in housing associations are workers, if you like, so they will potentially be agile working as well. I mean, can you see that sort of thing from a housing association looking at that type of model?
Well, certainly, that's a great thing that Katherine's picked up on. Then I think the change in multi-tenure, multi-age communities is going to be absolutely key. And you know, Platform a very agile workforce. They were before COVID. The execs were home-based before it all started. So we've got a very nimble approach to the way we think about solutions. But I think from a community, answering the question about communities, I think because of the ongoing and not going away challenges about fossil fuels, about oil, about all those challenges we've got now, which are really impacting on people. You talk about fuel poverty, there's commuter poverty as well. Yeah. So I'd like to think that in the future we have more active travel solutions. That means that infrastructure doesn't have to be so car reliant, that we've got better public transport, mass transport solutions for people to go when they do want to travel. I'd like to think that the days of the old high street don't disappear. I think that being able to walk to your high street and buy what you need, you know, go to your local shop, support the local environment. I'd love to see that thrive again, because I think that the need to drive half an hour to a supermarket to do your weekly shop, which isn't a weekly shop anymore, it's probably 3 or 4 times for some people, and the cost inflation that we are seeing, I think is, you know, going to have a massive impact. So I'd like to see more community-based solutions, things like community heating systems. You know, in Northern Europe, a lot of the social housing in Northern Europe is predicated on community-based sustainable heating systems. Yeah. You know, cities that are going to be carbon zero in their heating and self-sufficient, like Malmo in Sweden, for example, will be completely self-sufficient on energy within the next year or so. So we have shunned it to some extent, and I think we're going to have to embrace it. I think it's the way forward. More community-based solutions, more community support mechanisms, local shops coming back, that would be great. I know this is a bit of a vision of, yes, this is what I'd like to see. I think we almost would be, I think a lot of it would be driven by necessity. And I think things like electric cars, active travel, as I said, walking, cycling, accessibility to agile working, and communal hubs where you all can work in a place with fast broadband, a cafe, a local gym. You know, there's solutions like that all around. It's just making sure, as you said, with housing associations, because we are in perpetuity the landlord and we work in that community forever, we've got to think about the long-term sustainability of that community, whereas commercial house builders, they build, they sell, they move on, and that's the way it is. I mean, that's the nature of the business, but we are different. We've got inherently engaging with that community for the long term. So for us, the best interest is to build sustainable communities for all our customers, whatever the age.
Yeah. And to pick up from what Katherine said as well about single people, is to make sure we're building the tenures that we need. You know, are we building family homes? Are we looking at single apartments? And those things will have an impact on a community for sure. But hopefully it will be a blend of social housing, affordable housing, and home ownership, whether that's shared ownership in the mix as well. But yeah, extremely interesting. Thank you very much, both. We've covered a lot today, and the time has flown by, but is there anything that we haven't picked up on that you'd like to, any points that are burning that you'd like to share?
I think I just re-emphasize the fact, I think that the long-term solutions for us is that partnering and collaboration with other organizations is absolutely key. And we talk about it a lot. It's how much we actually convert into reality, because as organizations, we've all got a shared social purpose, and it's about coming together to unlock those solutions, because we're not truly, as in the commercial world, in competition with each other. However, I think the greater gains are from working together and finding those holistic approaches to development and housing support and all the rest of it. But I think they're the key issues. But we've covered an awful lot of ground, as you said, Marie.
Yeah, and I absolutely echo what you said there as well, Grant, in terms of partnership working, collaboration. That's got to be where we can move forward. Katherine, how about you? Is there anything that you'd like to add?
It's been a fascinating discussion, and it's been really great to have the opportunity to just step back from the things one gets involved in routinely. I guess the thing for me, just looking at the local situation here, is to use some of those ideas and also use them to support the voluntary sector. Marie mentioned that I'm chair of one of the local community land trusts, tiny organisation for a village with a population of 1,000 people. And everything's gradually falling into place for us to be able to develop on a teeny weeny site where we'll probably be able to put 4 affordable apartments for local people. That makes a big difference in a small community, but as well as scaling up to deliver against the housing crisis generally, I think it'd be great to find ways of using that collaboration amongst housing associations to support the voluntary sector on that local level.
I would say I totally agree with you, Katherine, and perhaps like rural housing could be a whole episode in its own right, because when I worked in housing, there was certain rural areas in our stock where there was limited, and we needed to get new people into those rural areas, you know, because it was such an aging population demographically. So yeah, I think that maybe that's a discussion for another time. But
Maria, we've recently completed a rural scheme in the Peak District, one of the first for many years. That is, it looks like it's been there for about 100 years. To be honest, it's that traditionally built. It was very restricted by the Peak District National Park. I'll send you some details about it. It's a very interesting scheme. I think it's probably going to be up for a few awards because it's so well focused about the local environment. But we, as you well know, probably we operate in cities, rural areas, suburban areas, and we know we've got a requirement to make sure we support customers, whether they are in the more rural areas of Herefordshire, Oxfordshire, Shropshire, Lincolnshire, or whether we're building in the cities of Bristol, Oxford, Birmingham, Leicester. So we've got to look at the whole thing, and it's finding those different solutions for, as Katherine said, you know, supporting local volunteer organisations as well.
yeah, I totally agree. And please do send the link over, because I shall add it into the show notes, because we always like to show where there's some really fantastic best practice going on as well. So that would be great. Thank you. Thank you both for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we'll have you back in future episodes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks.